Hello everyone and welcome back to Broke Talk. In this series, we're going over all of the vehicles I've ever owned. This particular episode is pretty awesome because it's three of my favorite cars that I've ever owned. Last episode, we had all the car breakdowns. This one, we have all the emotional breakdowns. Get yourself some ramen, crack an egg in it, and let's go enjoy this episode of Broke Talk. Next vehicle is the first vehicle that I bought. It was none other than a 1996 Buick Roadmaster Estate Wagon. Beauty of a car. I still own this car. It's one of the few cars on this list that I still own. What a gem that car was. It was some of the best driving experience I've ever had. For 3 weeks, I drove this car and it was some of the best driving. I was in heaven with this car. When I bought this car, I had to leave it at my dad's and I was at school, and I was just non-stop talking about it, non-stop thinking about it, non-stop dreaming about this car. Got it registered, I gave it a quick oil change, brought it over across state to UTI. Even though it was a V8 and I'd be paying up the ass for gas, I was so excited for this car. It had torque. I hit the throttle and it just had torque. You know, it had the engine noise. I deleted the top plenum to give it more noise. It was fantastic. I played with a pod filter on it. I was so happy for 3 weeks of this car. And one day, I'm just doing one of my trips back and forth across state, and I'm heading to school, and I'm just driving in the middle lane, and I'm hitting the gas, and I just don't hear anything. And I'm like, that's weird. Stick it in neutral, cruise over to the right, and I'm like, well, it's $1,000 vehicle. It is what it is, you know, calling a tow truck. But then I tried to put a wrench on the crankshaft, and that crankshaft would not turn. Hit the key, click, 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 nothing. What just happened? Like, did I just tank this motor? Like, so many things. I'm so angry. Whatever. The tow truck comes, drops me off of school. It was like $200. I'm like, this is embarrassing. He pulls up right as everyone's just chilling in the parking lot, and they all see the big beige Buick on the back of a tow truck. Everyone's head just turns and sees it. The one that I've been gloating about this whole time. My first cool car. All my friends see it, and all of a sudden my phone starts blowing up as I'm sitting in the passenger seat of this tow truck. Bringing her on back to the school, park it out back. I had to tell my friends. I talked to some administration, asked them, hey, is there, a period during this day where I can bring it to the shop? My car broke down on the way in. And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. I told the teacher, I'm like, look, it doesn't start at all. I couldn't even turn the crankshaft. He's like, ooh, okay, let's bring it in. If we're lucky, maybe the timing is super, super off. Maybe the timing chain jumped. Maybe we can get it back together. Like, let's see if we can fix this car. Get like 5-6 dudes to help push this thing in. And he's like, all right, turn the key and see what happens. Starts right up. Blew my mind, right? And oh, by the way, it is amazing that I don't have freaking AAA. Like, I just live so dangerously. I'm such a bad boy. Well, I had a ride set up with a dude that lived in the same city I was staying in. He was there and he saw the car running. So at the end of school, he booked it. But we're looking at this car and the teacher's like, oh, you hear that? And I'm like, no, I don't. And he revs a little bit. And I'm like, oh no. And then he just gets louder and louder and louder, and it's just there at idle. And he's like, yeah, you can't drive this home. He's like, yeah, you must have had, bearing spun or something, like, and once it cooled down, it was able to start. Try to get in contact with my dude that was gonna give me the ride. He already left. He was like home asleep by the time I figured this out. It was a cold winter day, and I had to sleep outside and sleep at a bus station so I could figure out a ride. Eventually, my cousin got out of work and gave me a ride home. It was one of the most roughest nights of my life. I had to figure it out. Car sat there for a little while. I reluctantly started driving my dad's Ranger. That was the end for the Buick for a while. I sat down, thought about it. I'm like, all right, well, this Explorer is still just chilling in this yard. The registration was still good and the plate was still on it. I just had to re-up on the insurance. And I started driving the Explorer. At this point, I've crashed the Explorer twice. The next year, I slowly rebuilt a junkyard motor for that car. Bought a junkyard motor for $300, very beat up. It was sitting at the bottom of like a pile of motors. So I took it, broke it all the way down. I replaced all the gaskets I could, and I got it down to like the block. Like there was like the crankshaft and pistons were out of that block. And in hindsight, I didn't need to do that. I was like, oh, well, I'm going to do it like I did in class and strip it all the way down, buy bearings, clearance it, this, and that. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm not buying all those tools. $300 set of bearings, and these bearings look awesome. So I ended up putting it back together, broke a piston ring, had to take parts from the old motor, got the motor together, got it in. Bought too small of an engine crane from Harbor Freight, got it in anyways. Pulled the engine out, a bunch of black transmission fluid came out of the transmission, and everyone knows what that means. Transmission's toast. But I still had hope for it, put some fresh fluid in it, and the car started up, and I was so happy. And then I put it in drive, nothing. There I stood with a car that I just put a year of my life at, a car that I love, and it's not moving. And I'm like, okay, the engine stuff's good, just gotta pull this transmission out, and I gotta decide if I want to get another used one and roll the dice. The transmission was a 4L60E, pretty common of a transmission, but I'm like, they all have hundreds of thousands of miles on it. I just spent the previous year's tax return on this engine. I'm like, you know what? This year tax return with, me being a student, I get like all of my taxes back. We just dump that into the transmission, be done with the car, and I can just drive off into the sunset and have grand old time. It's a great transmission shop that was right near my house. I paid $1,400 for the rebuild. I decided to up my game a little bit and do a shift improvement kit on it, so that way it shifted more, firmly. Get the transmission back. I get it in the car with nothing but a car jack, a piece of 2x4, and brute strength. And it just didn't drive perfectly, like no matter what I did. Changed spark plugs, timing was not adjustable. It was an opti spark system. It just always had to miss. The passenger side head always blew out black smoke. At about this time, I quit school. I thought that I could do it all. I thought that I could work and have enough money to pay off loans so that way I can keep going to school, because I didn't have enough grants to keep going to school. I had to take out loans, and then I was hoping that I could pay off Parent Plus loan as I'm going to school. But with the car and me putting all my money into it, I just didn't prioritize things correctly. Prioritize a Buick, prioritize all my money into it, all my extra time into it, and it wasn't running that great. My Explorer, I lost a wheel on my Explorer one day. I was getting off the highway, I felt to do a wobble in the back, and then it just fell off. I had to deal with it. I had to get a ride to an auto parts store, buy 3 lug nuts and 3 lugs, and hammer the old ones out, put these 3 on, get my wheel back on, get it home, next day buy more and do it, and get my stuff figured out. So at this point, I got a car that I've been putting everything into. It just wasn't working. A car that I've been neglecting, and I just wasn't given the attention and love that it needed. I just couldn't afford it anymore. Looking back, I did not do tech school the way I should have. It is what it is. I was a young kid. I was dumb. I learned a lot from that experience. So I left school and I came back to my hometown. I decided to get whatever job I could. Because I technically did not finish school, I couldn't get into dealerships at a higher pay like I was promised when I went into school. I technically took a temporary leave, and that was my intention, was to get back, but it just never happened. Those were the cards that I had in front of me, and I played them. I eventually found myself at a dealership. I ended up getting a Hyundai job because I had previous experience at a Kia dealership. I was there working on a Buick, trying to keep it running. The Explorer, which is the car that never died, but at this point I felt like I ruined this car. It wasn't the car that I was passionate about, and I just kept driving this Buick. Got to the point where it was overheating, and I couldn't take it long enough distance. It was literally just to work and back, and I just realized I just got to stop with this car, and I got to redo the engine work. I didn't do the engine work properly. I reused some old parts from the old engine, and it's just not liking it. I just got it in my head that I just need simpler cars. I've been working on these Korean cars for a while. You know, occasionally I work on Japanese cars, and I just see all these Japanese cars that, you know, are just simple to fix. And a couple tech friends of mine, they're like, dude, you got to get into Japanese cars. They are super simple to work on. They're the best kind of cars to, you know, DIY on yourself and stuff like that. Because I was no longer in school, I wasn't getting my full tax return back anymore. So reality hit me really hard at that point. I ended up looking for cheap Japanese cars. I was getting really into tuner cars. I always thought they were cool, but you know, my young brain was always like more horsepower, more torque, so I need a V8. I'm in Massachusetts. I'm not gonna find, you know, a four-wheel drive Blazer for sale that'll work and will be reliable for me for, you know, $1,000. I'm like, if I'm gonna get a day-to-day car, I just need something that's reliable, that gets me there. Perusing Craigslist, and I just see this beaut of a Subaru Forester, and I decide I'm gonna get this thing, you know. And I'm talking smack to my coworkers. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get me some import. I'm gonna mess around some imports, do some turbo stuff, you know. So I buy the Subaru. I go over there. This thing had 270,000 miles on the odometer. It was standard. It ran like a kitten. So I buy this car. I try to haggle him down to like 500. This dude would not budge at 700. Like, I've never met someone that wouldn't budge a little bit. I'm like, come on, man. Come on, man. I have 500 cash on me right now. Come take it. He's like, I won't take it, man. I'm like, all right. I'm messing around with this dude. I'm like, all right, you know what? I want to take a drive with my boys real quick. If you see a bank, we'll think about it and I'll call you back. Try to see if he'll say, hey, don't just take it for 5, but nope. He was so firm at 7. Went to the bank, pulled out $200. I'm like, all right, here, man. So here's $700. Took the car, signed the title, drove home. Well, here starts the chapter. Lizzie, the Subaru. Lizzie was a fine date. Lizzie was a 5-speed manual Subaru Forester with a 2.2 liter engine, which is quite peculiar of the late 90s Subaru Forester. Every database I look up, the only engine option for those were 2.5 liters. My only assumptions were someone swapped it or it's not originally a United States vehicle. But Lizzie was a good time. It was one of the longest owning cars that I've had while I was driving it. Lizzie was reliable. Lizzie plowed through that snow like no one's business. After a long snowstorm, I would just drive her out of the bank that she was plowed over and then shovel afterwards. The biggest issue with Lizzie that I've had was a known issue with the timing belt system of engines in that era from Subaru. It's the tensioner bolts loosened up on me. It was making noise. Luckily, I was smart enough to pop open that cover and see that this bolt was almost coming out. I pulled off everything and I'm just looking at this and I'm like, shit, this is an engine. Like, is this it? This is the end of Lizzie. But I found a solution. Lizzie was hurting and I found out that the plate was removable where the bolt bolted into. So I tried to find that plate, but I couldn't find the right tensioner bracket. Like, it was technically called a tensioner bracket. I couldn't find the right tensioner bracket, you know, because the car was supposed to have a 2.5 liter. Every time we typed the VIN in, it said it had a 2.5. So it may have been a swapped motor for all I know. You know, we kept getting the wrong part and I'm just looking at this thing. I'm like, you know, there's enough threads like deeper down. And the parts guy's like, well, why don't you just get a longer bolt? And I'm like, okay, get a longer bolt, red Loctite it, put it in. Worked like a charm. The right rear wheel bearing made noise. I was like, okay, bought a wheel bearing for it. Pressed it out, broke the hub, put a new one in anyways. Made noise again 3 months down the road, and then I replaced the whole hub. But Lizzie lived on. Lizzie was a good time. No matter how I put it. She had heat. She had AC. She was one of the best under $1,000 cars I have ever bought to this day. I had a sound system in Lizzie. I was inspired by Mighty Car Mods at the time, and I did the spare tire subwoofer. I mounted a trailer spare tire holder in the hatch of it so I can mount my spare tire out back like a Toyota RAV4. And I just drove this car until the day came where I decided I'm moving to Florida. I'm moving to Florida for personal family reasons. I loaded up Lizzie, and Mickey Prout and I drove down to Florida in a 1998 Subaru Forester with 299,000 miles on it. And we made it all the way there with just slight hiccups.
Here we go.
Two boys being boys.
Just two boys being boys. What, 20 hours?
20 hours.
See you, Chicopee. I'll see you in like, I don't know, 4 days.
As we're passing Connecticut, The speedometer stopped working. No problem. Phone app kept trucking along. Made it all the way to Georgia before she needed her regular drink of coolant. Unfortunately, because her speedometer problem, she never truly hit 300,000 miles. It was a damn shame, because this car had 300,000 miles on it and it was stuck at 299 and some change. For about the 6th time, the exhaust manifold fell off and broke apart. One of the hints that this car was, an engine swap. The exhaust wasn't truly right. On the boxer engines, they're supposed to have, these, the bolts with the springs in them and the flange. It was supposed to have that, but it didn't. It had flat flanges on it and it was just bolted on. Problem with that is, when the engine flexes, it can cause cracks in your manifold, and it kept cracking this manifold. Eventually, I ended up, after the exhaust manifold, I ended up putting a flex pipe, and it worked for a while, but those stress cracks were still there, and they were right at the closest to the engine. They were the hottest part. Eventually, I'm in Florida, eventually the wheels broke on it. A recurring dream kept appearing in my mind, a dream that I kept having long time ago about the Mazda Miata. These should be cars you can buy for $1,000 or under. They were worth nothing. You can buy them, you can track them, and they were great miles per gallon, as that dude in blue says. And then the prices rose, and I couldn't find it for $1,000 anymore. I'm here in Florida, and I'm trying to buy one of these cars. I got about $1,300 saved up after working a few weeks there. I see a Miata. Paint in this car was just terrible, to say the least. There, I could see primer, I could see rust, but no signs of it have ever left Florida. No rust in the wheel wells, no rust in the quarter panels, and it was like, it's just a clean Florida car. I take it for a test drive. The charge light flickers here and there, and I noticed that, but the steering feels tight. I hear some rattling, I hear some exhaust noises, and I go back to the owner and I look at her like, look, this car needs some work. And I think she posted it for 13 or 14 or something like that. Said, look, the best I can do is $1,000. She looks at me and we go back and forth, and we finally settle at $1,200. I've had other people tell me that you could have got it for $11, you could have got it for $1,000. I'm like, I could have, but the thing is, Miatas are at $3,000 and I just got a Miata for $1,200. So I am more than happy to pay that. So I bought the car. I came at a different date, picked up the car, gave her, I gave her half, and then I gave her another half. Drove it back, sat for a few weeks, and then I was able to register it, because in Florida it's super expensive to get tags. And then I had a couple problems in the DMV, but here I am. Lizzie sits at the front yard as Misaka takes front stage. Lizzie's currently sitting with the exhaust suspended, hanging on for dear life by the O2 sensors. And I'm all about this new car. I've had her posted for a while, and I talked to this guy. He just loves Subarus. He just couldn't bite. He had too many Subarus. His wife wouldn't let him, but he just had to see this car. I messaged him back and I'm like, hey man, would you take $300 for this car? And he's like, I cannot say no to that. Came right by, took the car, took it home. I felt my heart just crumble, man. As I'm watching this car leave, I'm just like devastated, man. Absolutely devastated. Devastated about this $700 car. To this day, I'm still devastated about this $700 car. I have called this guy back many times, and to my very horror, he traded it for a trailer for his boat. And the guy who he traded it for, used it as a daily while he fixed up his BMW. It is what it is. Lizzie is one of those cars that will always be deep in this guy right here. But starts on the story of Misaka. Misaka is a good time, no matter which way I put it. Just like Lizzie, but Misaka is all about the fun, not about the function. She's just here for a good time all the time. Didn't really know I was getting into, but this car drove, man. Ended up putting a new battery and an alternator in this car. Fixed the charge light issue, new belts, and drove it around, and it just needed oil change every once in a while, and it just kept driving, man. So I've been daily driving this car for 3 years. Since then, I had the paint done by a place that's cheaper than Mako, and you guys can kind of guess how that went. This place told me a week. And I'm like, dope. I'm out here working at this used car dealership at this point, making just good money under the table, you know, weekly pay, just fixing whatever random cars this dude buys, keeping them on the lot. At the time, nothing was shady. And I told him, like, I am an honest mechanic. I am not one of those dudes that, you know, will grease wheels to get it sold just for it to fall off later. And we had an understanding that this isn't that place. I used one of his contacts to paint the car. Ordered a fiberglass bumper for this car. Duraflex Whiz front bumper. I got it. I was so excited. I paid more money to ship this bumper than what I bought it for. You know, it was like $100 bumper, but I paid like $200 to ship this bumper. Try to get it on, and I'm like, there's no hardware to get this on. Take the old bumper off. I can't figure it out. You know, I'm like, this is above my realm. I'm a mechanic. I've never done auto body. I can't figure it out. My boss was like, dude, just send it to the auto body shop and they'll figure it out. I'm like, all right. I send this car to the shop with this bumper. First day to start working on it, they're like, yeah, this bumper is not working. It's never gonna fit. I'm like, all right. Give me until tomorrow morning and I will have a used bumper to put on the car and you can paint that bumper on the car. Head over to Jaxius Miata. They were super cool. Bought a bumper for $100. It was even white. I'm like, hell yeah. Go over there. They're like, oh no, the car's already painted. I'm like, why did you paint the car when I told you I'm getting a bumper? They're like, oh, well, it'd just be $100 more to paint the bumper. I'm like, no, it would have been the same price to paint this bumper. You painted the old ragged bumper that I pulled the body kit off of. That's on there. It looks crappy. You know, I don't want that. I said, screw it. I'm gonna deal with it. I'm gonna put it all on myself. They're like, okay, still need another day to let the paint dry and then buff it and all that. I'm like, all right, cool. Come back next day, pick up my car, and I popped the hood, overspray all over the engine bay, everywhere. All the VINs are painted over. I'm just like, this is crap. This is absolute crap. Paint looked okay. There were dents in the car that I knew weren't there. I knew these dents weren't there on the car. They said, no, that wasn't us. When they removed the paint, the dent was there. You should have fixed the dents while the car was stripped down. But I'm not arguing these guys. The paint job was super cheap. I can't argue with that. If it was at Mako, I can absolutely argue every single thing. I should have gone to Mako, but it is what it is. And that's all the music I got painted. All right, so the Miata's all done painted. It's got a off-white front bumper on. If you guys noticed in some of the videos, the white doesn't actually match the rest of the car in the bumper. But it is what it is. So here I am with this bumper. At this point, I call the company up and tell them, hey, look, I tried to pay a professional body shop to install this bumper. They say it will not fit the vehicle. I need to return it. They're like, okay, all you need to do is pay to ship it back to the company. When the company gets it, you get your money back. And I'm like, miss, I paid $100 for this bumper. The shipping costs $200. Why would I pay another $200 to get $100 back? And she had no answer for me. So I was like, it's my bumper. I'm not gonna pay $100 to give it back to you. Like, that's not what's gonna happen here. So at this point, I have this bumper sitting around for a while. I posted online, try to get my money back. Nope. Try to get what I paid for in parts for it. Nope. And then finally, I just put $50 online. Someone comes down and they're like, yeah, sure. I also had another couple body pieces for the Miata that I kept, thinking that I'd replace them. The part where the rear license plate sits, mine has a crack in it. It still does today. I was planning on replacing it. The front bumper, I got them in a package deal at Jaxius Miata. And, you know, I just didn't see myself painting the car again anytime soon. So I ended up posting that for sale on the Facebook groups as well. And the same guy messaged me back. He's like, hey, I want that. I'm like, okay, cool, come get it. And I see the dude and I immediately recognize him. Like, hey, you're the guy that bought my bumper, right? He's like, oh yeah. So I talked to him like, hey, how did that bumper fit? He's like, oh, fit like a glove. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah. I got to fit nice. And he showed me pictures and the bumper looked amazing. I'm like, how did this dude fit this bumper in his backyard? And then this professional auto body shop couldn't get this bumper to fit. Said it's so off. It did not fit the lines of the car at all. They told me it was the worst molding they've ever seen. And that just ticked me off even more. You know, that made me not want to do any more business with any more of my other cars at that point. Everything else with this car can be seen in my channel. All the work that I've done for my car from that point forward has been on my channel. Usually summarize a couple things. You know, we did the interior upgrade. Interior upgrade was a hit or miss. Manga bombing did look awesome for a little while. The Florida heat and humidity does get to it. So, you know, if you live in Florida and you do an interior manga bomb, like, it's just not gonna last forever. You know, you may get a few months out of it at best. It's just this heat, especially when you leave your car closed in the sun. It just gets to that paper so quickly. So you'd probably have to end up redoing it, you know, every few months or so. There may be a couple options that, you know, will work better. Manga wraps might be a better option. I don't believe I'll be able to get the ones in the manga that I want, because I named Misaka after an anime character and I wanted that specific manga to be in the car. But that'd be something I deal with another time. We've done the engine install. You know, I took a motor off of a 1990 Miata, gutted it, and I replaced everything on it. And right now that motor is running awesome. We did the upgraded clutch while we had the engine out, and we also did a radiator because I may have dinged the radiator while I had it out while I was pulling the motor. So everything just got an upgrade while I was doing that whole engine setup. Well, hope you guys enjoyed that. Those three were my 3 favorite cars that I've ever owned up to date. Next episode, we're gonna go through all of my Florida cars. If you guys have enjoyed this series, please leave a like. It really helps the channel out, and I hope to be dishing out content like this and like the builds more often. Catch you guys later. See ya.